Hello, everyone. I'm Haley Hansen, a partner and the leader of Husch Blackwell's Higher Education Group. Before we begin today, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them via the question box. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the webinar. And hopefully, I'm sure there's going to be quite a few questions as well. Also, we want to let you know that there are resources within the resource folder, and there's a copy of not only the slides, but also additional resources in that folder for you as well. So you might want to take a look at that folder and print off or save what you would like. This program has been approved for continuing legal education hours. To report your hours, you want to click on the CEU icon at the bottom of your screen. A certificate of attendance, including the course number, will be emailed to you tomorrow along with a recording of this webinar so that you can watch it and share it at your institution. Towards the end of the program, we also ask that you complete a short survey to give us feedback on our future programming that's applicable to higher education. That's it for the housekeeping matters, so let's get started. Let me introduce our speakers today. Joining me is Ellen Armentrout and Elizabeth Samples. Ellen assists higher education clients with their compliance needs. Prior to joining Husch Blackwell, Ellen worked for 15 years as an attorney in the General Counsel's Office at Michigan State University. We're very happy to have Ellen with us today, and also Elizabeth Samples, who serves as an educational institutions in a variety of compliance areas. She also supports colleges and universities with day-to-day counseling, investigations, training, policy, and system development. Prior to joining Husch, she was with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. So we're very happy to have Ellen and Elizabeth joining us today. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Ellen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad to have you here. As Haley said, I'm Ellen Armentrout. I'm going to start out our presentation today. Basically, we want to talk about sort of four subcategories. One, what happened with the recent changes? Two, what has remained the same? Three, what changes with the new guidance? And four, what's next? What that means for all of us who work with Clery and higher ed. So first, with regard to what happened. All of you know we had the Clery handbook since 2016. This was a sub-regulatory guidance, non-binding, they said. I put that in quotation marks because we all know how difficult it is not to feel like you need to adhere to a guidance when it comes from a government agency, even though they might say it's non-binding. It was published in 2016, 265 pages of guidance about statute and regulation that aren't near that long, 14 subsections, not including the appendices, and filled with examples and definitions that we would all use and rely on pretty heavily when working on our Clery compliance. That handbook, poof, is now rescinded. So that is what happened. So what is it replaced with? There is now a Clery appendix, and that is part of, it's connected to an existing document for financial aid that we all also know and use regularly. Again, the department was very clear that this is non-binding sub-regulatory guidance. It was accompanied by an electronic announcement. The announcement itself was 5 pages. The appendix is 13 pages. Both were published on October 9th, 2020, with the rescission and replacement of the 2000 Clery handbook. So we've gone from a 265-page document to 18 total pages of sub-regulatory, non-binding guidance about Clery compliance. So why did this happen? I've taken a quotation from the electronic announcement that said the department made the determination that the Clery handbook did not achieve the department's goal of ensuring that adequate information is available to the public to foster improved campus safety and security. And the department concluded that much of the guidance was outside of the scope of the relevant statutory and regulatory authority. The document makes it clear that the department, as it currently exists, felt that the Clery handbook, upon which we had been relying for the last 4 years, it went beyond the scope of what the regulations and the statute require, and was an example of regulatory overreach. The department also said that its goal was to enable institutions to focus on maintaining a safe and secure environment, rather than spending time and resources generating reports that, quote, few students or parents consult and that could overwhelm them with excessive data that obscures the most important and helpful parts of the report. So it seems that this was an effort to reduce regulatory overreach and refocus Clery compliance on maintaining a safe and secure environment instead of dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's of the ASR and the time that would take, as was encouraged by the Clery handbook. So we have our first poll question now. Based on what happened on October 9th with the rescission and replacement of the Clery handbook, should your institution continue to rely on the Clery handbook for the 2020 ASR that needs to be posted at the end of this year? So I'm going to give you all a little bit of time to put in your responses. I'm going to see what folks have said here. The majority of you have, 86.9% of you say yes. We think that is the best practice as well. Even though the handbook was rescinded effective immediately, the department says it will continue to be referenced in program review reports and final determinations for the years during which it was effective, and it's still a safe harbor. And they actually spoke particularly about the examples that are given in the Clery handbook that don't exist in the appendix or the electronic announcement. They understand that institutions, when they see an example that is consistent with a situation that the school itself is experiencing, the department has been clear that you may, rely on that example and what the department recommends as a safe harbor. So we are encouraging folks. I don't think that doing something that is consistent with the 2016 Clery handbook for purposes of your 2020 ASR is going to get you in any trouble. In addition, the department has said that it recognizes that many Clery practitioners, and I would include myself among them, have become accustomed to the Clery handbook and they continue to rely on it for direction. So if there's good information in the Clery handbook for you, there is nothing to stop you from using it. So the effective dates. The appendix, as it's stated in the document itself, is effective for the reporting year following publication. So our interpretation of this is that an ASR posted in 2021 reflecting 2020 statistics is guided by the new appendix. So moving forward, starting with next year's ASR, the appendix is what you will be relying on. So what does this mean for all of us who work on the ASR and are involved with Clery compliance moving forward? Less rigidity. I put a question mark here because I think it's really hard to know. I think the intent is less rigidity, meaning that there aren't so many requirements that, sub-regulatory or not, that you feel like you need to comply with. But at the same time, does this really mean that there's more flexibility in your reports? I like to think so, but if you got a compliance audit, we don't know. It might mean we just have more questions about what we're supposed to do to meet the requirements of the statute and the regulations with help from the appendix. With less information in the appendix, while that might mean greater room for interpretation, it also means greater room for questions. With the Clery handbook, you were really able to thumb through and find lots of answers to lots of questions. That's really not going to be the same anymore. And then, as always, more documentation. I think, with with fewer words to rely on with regard to guidance, I think that it does mean that institutions need to be careful. And when they make a decision to put something in an ASR or not to put something in an ASR, that those decisions should be documented so that you don't find yourself caught up short down the road if the department decides to take issue with something you have done in connection with your report or something that you have said. So I think we have a lot of questions right now that still need to be answered, and we will see about how things turn out as we move forward. And now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, who's going to talk a little bit about the basic requirements of the Clery Act and what is staying the same.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. So we're going to begin this section on what remains the same with another poll question. So the question is, I believe the rescission of the Clery handbook will make compliance easier for my institution. So state if you think you agree with that or don't agree with that, or you don't know. And we'll give you a minute to submit your response, and then we'll share the results. Okay, so it looks like most of you are unsure as to what this will mean for compliance efforts. About 36% of you have shared that you don't think it will make it easier, and I think that's sort of reflective of what Ellen was just discussing, which is even the department acknowledging that for many years now, Clery administrators and others who have been in charge of compliance efforts have relied on the handbook and its examples in sort of guiding our compliance efforts. So there are some challenges as we move forward and kind of make sure that we're in compliance. One of the keys here though is to talk about what remains, and we know that many of you on the call are very familiar with the fundamentals of Clery requirements, so we don't want to spend too much time on this section, but we do want to take a few minutes to go over what remains the same despite the rescission of the handbook. And one of the things that the department references in the announcement and in the appendix is reference back to the regulations. Nothing has changed with respect to the regulations that guide Clery compliance. So, of course, the fundamental mandate to collect and classify reports of certain crimes, that remains. Publishing information about those statistics, as well as various information about policies and procedures in our ASR, that also remains. The requirement to issue timely warnings and emergency notifications, compliance with VAWA requirements, including providing information about your institution's programs to prevent dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Those all remain. Maintaining a daily crime log if your institution maintains a campus police or campus security department. And then similarly, depending on your whether you have housing facilities, policies and procedures related to missing students and fire safety reporting, those fundamentals remain despite the rescission. So the fundamental requirement, of course, in Clery is the mandate to compile and report crime statistics. And this requirement relates to Clery Act crimes reported to have occurred in the institution's Clery geography and reported to a CSA, Campus Security Authority. So that fundamental principle remains. But as Haley will discuss in detail, changes to the guidance related to each of these areas will impact what is included within each of the categories, affecting whether it will be something that ultimately, gets included in a report. So, for example, changes in guidance about defining Clery geography and who are CSAs may exclude incidents that would have previously been included. And that goes back again to something that the department referenced in the announcement, which is a thought from the department that the reliance on the handbook resulted in sort of over-inclusion of incidents in ASRs. So 2 additional categories to mention are timely warnings and emergency notifications, and then publication of policies and procedures. Institutions are still required to provide emergency notifications and timely warnings. This is a chart here that the department included in the appendix. So emergency notifications, of course, relate to immediate notification to the campus community about significant emergencies or dangerous situations. Timely warnings still have those specific criteria for incidents that involve Clery Act crimes on Clery geography that represent a serious or continuing threat. So particularly with timely warnings, the analysis about whether an incident requires a timely warning may change depending on the specific facts, but the fundamental requirements about, when to issue one, if certain criteria are met, that remains. And additionally, institutions are still required to develop emergency response and evacuation procedures and include them annually in the ASR. As you know, several statements of policy are required in the ASR, and this has not changed with the rescission of the handbook. Statements of policy are still, of course, required about prevention programs related to dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Institutions still have to include reporting procedures and procedures about disciplinary action relating to these types of allegations, and still have to include information about rights and options, information for victims. In addition, institutions have to provide information about policies related to campus law enforcement, so information about how to report crimes, about programs related to the prevention of crimes on your campus, information about relationships with state and local law enforcement agencies, as well as information about encouraging community members to practice ensuring safe practices for their own safety and safety of others. So all of that is still required in terms of publication of these policies and procedures. Finally, institutions must include statements about policies and procedures related to drugs and alcohol. So annual notifications to students and employees about alcohol and underage drinking laws, illegal drugs and applicable federal and state drug laws related to the Drug-Free Schools and Community Act. These are still required pieces, of the ASR, that is including information about these policies and about these programs that affect your community members. And then finally, before I turn it over to Haley for a deep dive into what has changed under the new guidance, we wanted to note a specific section of the appendix which highlights the potential overlap but also the differences between Clery geography and Title IX. So the appendix reminds institutions that the Title IX regulations extend to particular conduct occurring in an institution's education programs and activities, which may result in an incident being covered by an institution's Title IX sexual harassment grievance procedures, but not requiring an accompanying Clery report, either because of the alleged conduct or because of an assessment of the location, event, or circumstances where the alleged conduct occurred. The reverse could also be true if an institution owns and controls campus property abroad, wherein a report could fall under Clery geography but outside of the jurisdiction of the Title IX sexual harassment policy, because of the exclusion of conduct that occurred outside the United States. So the key here is, for institutions to recognize the potential overlap, but also the differences when it comes to individual incidents. As institutions, we recognize institutions are still adjusting to the new Title IX regulations and the accompanying policies and procedures there, and then now sort of grappling with the revisions to Clery guidance. And so the key is to just kind of keep these overlapping issues in mind as well as some of the differences. So now I'm going to turn it over to Haley, who will discuss in detail what has changed with the new guidance.
Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, so this section is really going to go into a deep dive into what we know, and there's a lot that we don't know. So I just want to be kind of clear about that right now as well, but we're going to kind of point out the things that have changed. I think it's important to really understand as we talk about the different changes that this is different than when other handbooks or other Dear Colleagues letters have been rescinded, in that it is still being looked at as a safe harbor, as Ellen said earlier. And that's important, that if you're following it as a safe harbor, that's still going to be persuasive if you're in a Clery audit, or if you're working through a program review and you get Clery questions and things like that. So keep that in mind, that is a difference, and it's not like, as Elizabeth was just talking about, the Title IX regulations in which it required institutions to make these changes, to change their policy in most cases by the implementation date of August 14th. This is a different animal, so I just want to be clear about that. So let's really talk about what has changed. And as we look at what's changed, I start with the beginning. What's the most important piece of Clery? Geography, geography, geography. So the new appendix makes it very, very clear that we need to now focus on the statute and the regulations. And so much of my work in looking at the changes was really going back to that statutory language and the regulations that went into place or updated with the VAWA information in 2015. So again, the intent as the announcement came out from the department was that there's too much information and that it goes beyond the scope of really what is in the law, the statute and the regulations. So when in doubt, look back to that plain meaning. So what does that mean? That means if we look at Clery geography, the types of geography haven't changed. They're within the law. Campus property, including that we need to report on on-campus housing facilities, non-campus buildings or property, and public property. And we're going to talk about some of those changes of how you can look at your map and creating your Clery geography at your campuses. So campus versus non-campus property. The language from the regulations is very clear, and I've just tried to make a chart to make it a little easier for you, but that campus property is that your institution owns or controls the site, that the building and the property are within the same reasonably contiguous geographic area, and that it's in the direct support of students. And so that's the statutory and actually regulatory language that the department wants you to look at as you're trying to determine what is your campus property versus what is your non-campus property. And non-campus property is still the same that you own or control, and still the same that it's still the same that it's used for the direct support of your programs, your educational purposes, but actually says it's not reasonably contiguous to your main campus, and adds that it's frequently used by students. So those are the two differences between the campus property and the non-campus property as we're looking at these changes and how you may want to change your Clery geography, or at least look at your Clery geography as you're moving forward. So let's look at the next slide, here we go, which is public property. So public property, again, this comes directly from the regulations, and the regulations actually mirror the statutory language. So both the regulations and statutory language talk about that it is public property that is within the same reasonably contiguous geographic area of the institution, such as a sidewalk, a street, other thoroughfare, parking facility that is all adjacent or owned to a facility that's owned or controlled by the institution, that's going to be considered to be public property. So the definition hasn't changed, but the examples, as Ellen talked about, the example of the second sidewalk rule that we all know so well from our Clery handbook, that has been taken out. And so now it's up to the institution to determine the public property that is in the same reasonably contiguous geographic area as the campus. And remember, and the handbook said this, but I don't think there's anything in the statute or regulations that differ from this, but the public property is for the campus and not for non-campus property. All right, so let's look at exactly what the appendix eliminates. The definition of what it means to be owned or controlled by. So now we don't have a definition anymore of what is owned or controlled by. And many of you that are very familiar with the handbook know that there was a sentence in the handbook that talked about any type of writing or written communication, even including an email that showed ownership or control was enough to satisfy that element and making a determination if the institution actually owned or controlled it. That's been eliminated. So now it's just going back to the definition that the institution wants to adopt as owned or controlled. It's still a safe harbor if you're going to look at owned or controlled in that determination, but the department specifically in the announcement said it was getting rid of that definition because it was too expansive, that it included too much. Also in the announcement, the department said that the directly supports, when we talk about that it directly supports the educational programs and mission of the institution, that definition has also been eliminated because the department believed it went beyond what the statutory language talked about. Also, one of the big things that we have has been very popular to some schools has been the elimination of any specific measurement regarding reasonably contiguous. So lots of you who are familiar with the handbook know what I'm talking about, the 1 mile rule. It is gone. There is no specific measurable distance that is in that definition of what is reasonably contiguous. So what the department is telling you to do is go back to the plain language or plain meaning in the statute and make your own determination and make sure that you're documenting the determination that you make so that you can show what your campus looks like after you've made those decisions. What is the campus geography? Something that will make you all happy, every single one of you on this phone call or on this webinar, is that overnight stays, when we were talking about student trips that are more than one night, that has all been eliminated. And institutional sponsored travel for more than one night, you no longer have to contact law enforcement in those jurisdictions if your students go to a conference and stay in the same hotel for more than a night. That has all been eliminated. So that was a large burden on usually the either law enforcement or police or security departments as they were putting together their ASRs, and that has been eliminated and actually was referred to in the announcement as one of the things that the Senate report really looked at in kind of providing guidance to make these changes or rescinding the actual handbook, that this really was too much. And so that has been very clear that you no longer need to get law enforcement statistics from those types of stays. What is a little bit more confusing is separate campus. So as you know, there were elements of what makes up a separate campus, and the 2016 handbook actually went through quite a few elements as to whether or not you had an administrator on site. I mean, there were several different elements to say, is this a separate campus? Now that has been eliminated as well by the appendix, and you just go back to the regulation. And the regulation, I've actually put it on this slide, says an institution must comply with the requirements of this section for each separate campus. So it does not define what is a separate campus anymore, and that definition has been eliminated. So again, it's going to be up to you as an institution to determine whether or not you believe this is an actual separate campus that you need to independently comply with, including the creation of your ASR. Again, you can put it in one document, but independently comply with. And then there's been lots of questions about, study abroad, and that there's no discussion whatsoever within the appendix regarding study abroad and how this may affect study abroad. So I think, again, you're going to have to go back and look at your geography and what is your Clery geography. Look at the plain language that is within the regulations. And now when the handbook used to be kind of our best friend to look at, it's really going to be the regulations of, how we make these determinations. And again, at each individual campus, making sure you document why you made the determinations that you did as you're identifying what is going to be your Clery geography. All right. So here are the decision points that I think you want to look at. Number one, are you going to define or redefine your campus geography for 2021? Are you going to go back and look at your map as you go forward? And I still really think it's best practice. It's written in the regulations that you may have a campus map showing your Clery geography. It doesn't say you must. It says you may within the regulations. I still think that is best practice. That is very useful and helpful to be able to identify to your students, your faculty, your staff, what is considered within your Clery geography. And it is very helpful as well when you're posting your ASR to be able to show that. So again, best practice as you're looking at that. Documentation of the determinations if you have any separate campuses. Again, you're not bound by the definition in the handbook. And so, I at least know of a couple of schools that I work with that may make a different determination as to whether or not these are actually separate campuses, with that being eliminated and going back just to the statutory language. And then also policy determinations for travel and study abroad. How are you going to handle things like this that are no longer, potentially that some of these these requirements have been eliminated due to the Clery geography or how you define it in terms of non-campus property if you have an overnight stay or things like that. But are there any other policies that you want to adjust or align because of those determinations? So just things to think about as you're looking at what your decision points may be internally as you move forward. All right, so let's move on from geography and talk about the next, what I think is most important, Clery crime reporting. That's really where we see the majority, when we see Clery audits, the majority of Clery fines come in this category of crime reporting, whether it's most of the time it's under-reporting, but also can be in some situations over-reporting as well. So what are the changes that we're seeing in crime reporting? What do you need to be aware of? All right, so I just wanted to put this slide up here because nothing's changed. This is actually from, I went through it word for word within the regulations and statute to make sure this is all the same in terms of the primary criminal offenses and what it's broken down to, hate crimes and how you have to report on hate crimes. That's all within the law, all within the regulations, arrests and disciplinary referrals, as Elizabeth went through, and the VAWA offenses. So none of those categories have been changed when you talk about how you're going to report. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page there. What has changed, though, as you look at crime reporting is this kind of unknown that we have right now. So let me walk you through it. So obviously, we have all been under the FBI uniform crime reporting requirements, and under the SRS, which is the Summary Reporting System, there is the hierarchy rule. The hierarchy rule is stated right here. It's right in the regulations as well, which again it says for the purpose of reporting crimes in this system, that when one criminal offense is committed and there's multiple crimes within that offense, you count the most serious crime. And within this exception, arson is an exception to that. You always count arson as well. What I think is silent within the new appendix and even the announcement within the appendix is the effect, and it actually says on page 2 of the appendix, that the FBI has announced that it will retire the SRS and transition to only using the National Incident-Based Reporting System, and that happens January of 2021. So the National Incident-Based Reporting System does not contain a hierarchy rule. The hierarchy rule is only within the SRS. And so that is not talked about when we talk about these changes, but it is something that I think we are trying to get further clarification from the department of whether or not we should be using the hierarchy rule. Obviously, with their announcement and talking about the confusion with over-reporting or too much reporting, you would think that the department would like us to only, if there's multiple crimes within an incident, only report that most serious offense, but that is all not going to be part of the Uniform Crime Reporting System as of January 1st. I've also given you kind of a link here to resources to really understand the NIBRS. I mean, it's very helpful as you look at the NIBRS reporting system. And one of the things it says in the intro to this document from the FBI is that the NIBRS is actually more robust and reports more than the SRS. And so that is very interesting in terms of how this is going to affect us. And what I can tell you is whatever we find out from Husch Blackwell, we wanted to alert you of this issue, there's silence within the appendix on it, but whatever we find out, we will make sure to put out a legal alert and let you know what we're able to find out. So again, this is the SRS definitions are being retired, and that is what is contained within the FBI. As they move forward, you will only use the definitions in the NIBRS. It's important to understand, though, within the VAWA crimes that the definitions have actually been listed within the regulations, and so that is something that you should be aware of as well, to go back to the regs as you're looking at VAWA crimes, that there's helpful information, as the department has said, and go back to the regs. All right. The other thing that the appendix is silent on, and just something I wanted to flag for you, was that the Clery handbook actually said that fondling, if it was also part of a rape or incest or statutory rape, as if it was part of another sexual offense, was actually an element of that offense, and so you don't double report. But now it's unclear whether or not you would report fondling even within a rape or incest or statutory rape as well. So that's another, just something to flag for you. And I cautioned you that we don't have all the answers, unfortunately. We went from quite a bit of guidance in the handbook to now 13 pages within the appendix, and some of these questions just they didn't come up within the appendix, as you can imagine. So then we have to go back to the statute and then go back to the regulations. And I've meticulously checked, and this issue is not flagged in there. It was only within the Clery handbook, and that has now, as Ellen said, been rescinded. Another big issue for crime reporting has been, and there was quite a bit of discussion in the announcement about this, but the determination of who is a CSA on your campus. So I've gone back to the regulation and what the regulatory definition is, and the criticism from the announcement, I think, was just that the handbook really expanded what a CSA is well beyond what the statute and regulation said, and so wanted to kind of go back and have talked about this, that it's really up to, and this is actually on page 3 of the appendix, there's 2 paragraphs which really talks about the designation of CSAs, and that the department will defer to the institution's designation. And the department actually, in the appendix, went so far as to say that CSAs, they really wanted you to focus on whether or not the individual had significant responsibility, that the regulations don't require an employee with minimal responsibilities for student or campus activities to necessarily be considered a CSA, and that's on a case-by-case basis. So making sure that you look at, and this term focus on significant responsibilities and determining who is going to be a CSA. I still think that it is going to be important for you as an institution to have an individual or group that is designating or coordinating the oversight of a CSA, because obviously CSAs are very important. Nothing changed that you, if you have a Clery crime reported in Clery geography that's reported to a campus security authority or local law enforcement, that it must be included within those crime statistics. That, and we're not talking about the daily crime log here, just the crime statistics, and that is important, that you really have somebody determine what is your definition. Are you going to look through your employees and determine who has significant responsibility instead of those with minimal responsibility? And one of the examples that was given in the new guidance was essentially looking at somebody who may have a limited role as a faculty advisor or somebody like that with a student organization, and maybe that would be much more limited and not a significant role than others. So essentially leaving it up to the institutions and saying that the department will defer to the institution's designation. Now, it's interesting because in the last few program reviews that we saw coming out in 18 and even 19 and 20, CSAs, and particularly whether or not you train CSAs, was part of program reviews and ultimately fines for some of whether or not they had accurate crime reporting, because, did the CSAs make sure that they knew what they were supposed to report, and did you make sure they reported everything they were supposed to report? So we saw all that within some of those decisions. But again, from the handbook, the CSA additional information has been eliminated. So your decision points are, number one, you decide as an institution who you're going to designate as a CSA. Make sure whoever you designate, of course, knows they're a CSA. I should have put a question mark behind training to CSAs or for CSAs. I think that's still an institutional decision. It is not required. Let me be very clear, it is not required, but I still think it's best practice. And then I think the last two are really best practice, that they're not required within the statutory or statutory guidance or regulation, which is identifying a procedure to report the crimes for your CSAs and keeping documentation of what CSAs reported. That has been something that has been asked for in some program reviews, or some Clery reviews, but it's not required within the statutory language. And again, the department wants us to always revert back to the statutory language. Final issues to consider, and I know I've been talking for a while on these, but the daily crime log, one thing that I will point out is that the statute and regulations talk about Clery geography. So there were specific statements or policy statements that were in the handbook that said you must make this statement if you don't have an MOU with local law enforcement or something like that. That's been eliminated as well, those specific statements, although the policy requirements are still there because they're within the regulations. And then record-keeping guidance and how long you keep those records. Again, that the information that was very helpful to individuals within the handbook has been eliminated, so we're looking back to the statute, the regulatory guidance, which is somewhat silent on some of these issues as well. So just things for you to consider as you're looking at what you may do as you move forward. All right, so what's next? So the question you've all been asking before I even started this, we kind of put it at the end so that you would keep listening, hopefully, is President-elect Biden. He's already stated on his website, this is from his website, that it is one of his priorities under his administration to strengthen not only Title IX but Clery Act enforcement, and talked about that under the Trump administration, at least from the Biden administration's perspective, there has been a rollback on important protections under Title IX, and that, again, that Biden will, and this is in their statement, increase fines imposed on colleges for Clery Act violations or failing to report statistics about campus safety. So as the department clearly said in their announcement several times, this is guidance. This is not the force of an effective law. So the Biden administration could come in on day one and rescind this guidance and provide a new Clery handbook or provide other types of guidance, or go through and do changes to the regulations to provide more clarity and go through a notice and comment period to provide additional changes within the regulation. So that can all happen as a Biden administration takes office and makes these determinations. But I did want you at least to know what is on, and this was actually pulled prior to the announcement this weekend of President-elect, but that this is something that's part of the campaign platform that Biden ran on. So that is the effect. All right, the next piece of this I just wanted to go over with you is just the enforcement overview in terms of how does Clery enforcement work and what could happen there, and just the different types of, again, legal enforcement. You have agency enforcement with the Department of Education. You have the mechanism for that, which is program reviews as well. So that is kind of how enforcement works. There's two different types generally of reviews. First, program reviews, and those can be, number one, within a Title IV program review, that the Title IV program reviewers are now supposed to ask any school that is, well, and they have been actually for quite some time, is going through a program review about their Clery compliance and assess whether or not there are issues with Clery compliance at that institution. And then there can be focused program reviews as well, and some of them, actually the majority of them in the last few years, have come from the initiation of a Title IV program review, and that the Title IV program reviewers identified Clery issues and so sent it on for a more focused Clery Act program review that typically comes from Jim Moore's group in D.C. that would do a really deep dive into a Clery Act program review. That's a possibility. So program review is a type of review, and then we have also seen an increase in the spot check reviews, specifically about timely warnings and emergency notifications when there's been threats or serious issues that have been on campus, and how those timely warnings and emergency notifications were handled. So those are the two types of reviews. And then I'll just, as a little reminder, kind of show show you the process if you have that program review. And usually they've taken between, an average has been between 2 and 3 years. Some people have taken up to 7 years, but you get a notice of a program review, usually a visit within 2 to 3 weeks, and you're not able to say, oh, somebody's not going to be here at that time. Can you come back, in a month or two? They come to campus, and then there's an analysis by the department. And then they issue the preliminary program review report, the PRR, and then you get a chance to respond to that, usually 30 days to respond to that, and then you get a final, after considering the institution's response, then that final report is issued. And you don't find out about your fine until after the final report. So most of the time you're sometimes quicker than this, but 2 to 2.5 years into the process before you find out what the fine is, and then you have the opportunity to appeal and go through the appeal process through the department. So generally, that's just a reminder of what happens there. All right, so final reminders. We've given you lots of information. Some information, I guess, we don't really know exactly the entire effect of it, but wanted to just flag it for you. But here's our final reminders before we get to some questions. Number one, the extension of the deadline to complete your 2019 ASR is December 31st, 2020. All of the elements of the ASR are still required, and some institutions have gone ahead and already met those and already posted those. They were ready to go. Lots of schools are not at school on December 31st, so just remind people early is fine, too, to post them earlier if you're not going to have people that are there. And remember that the ASR must contain your current policy statements. And so what we've seen is, and this is from the handbook, but that those current policy statements would include your current Title IX policy of the changes that you had to make as a result of the implementation of the regulations on August 14th. So just a reminder on that as well. All right, Ellen and Elizabeth, I have spoken for a long time. I'm sorry, but let's see if we have any questions that we want to answer. I know we only have a few minutes left in our time today.
This is Ellen. I noticed that one person asked a question about removing reported crimes from the statistics, and if you look at the appendix, it basically says that an institution is not required to include or may remove a reported crime from its statistics when a sworn or commissioned law enforcement personnel have fully investigated the reported crime and made a formal determination that the crime report is false or baseless and therefore unfounded. So that rule has not changed at all in light of the new appendix. That's just something that has stayed the same. The requirement for what it means to be unfounded has stayed the same, and it's only in that situation that the crime may be removed and listed as an unfounded crime in your CSR. That was one question that came along that I wanted to address. Someone asked, will there be any flexibility for unintentional deficiencies due to the pandemic? We haven't seen anything that would suggest that was the case. I think the department probably feels like they made this concession that they were going to make by extending the deadline for reporting to December 31st. I think that it'll be very interesting to see what the new administration does, if anything, with regard to, I suspect if the new administration makes some changes, then we'll know whether there are going to be any sort of additional grace for institutions who are filing these reports. But until then, I think for next year we operate under this new appendix, and I have not seen anything to indicate that there will be any kind of extension of grace for failures to comply.
Haley, we also had a question about designation of CSAs and kind of an acknowledgement that in the past there have been, kind of discussion about rape victims advocates and ombudspeople being designated as CSAs and whether that should continue. I think the key there is that, the new guidance makes it clear that the department will defer to institutions' reasonable determinations about who's a CSA and kind of just going back to that regulatory definition. And that may be an area, again, as you just highlighted, that we may get more guidance in the future, about kind of the department's approach to designation of CSAs. We also got quite a number of questions about travel.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth. Can I just answer that too? Just add to it.
Yes.
I think with the CSA designation that it is going to be up to you. So you can, I think, scale back the number of CSAs that you have, and if that's your determination, you need to just document how you're following the regulatory language of what is a CSA, and that's fine. The department's going to follow that. The department did say in its announcement that it was going to have a series of webinars to try to answer some of these questions. I haven't seen any announcement of any webinars that have been planned, so I'm not sure whether or not that's going to happen or not, but I think there are a lot of questions that people would like to get answered, and so that may be one way to get some of those answers. And Elizabeth, I think you were going to go on to another question. I interrupted you, so I'm sorry.
No, that's right, and I think this probably also relates to some of those upcoming webinars, hopefully, but we got several questions about travel and not just one overnight stay, but repeated travel. And again, I think as you already highlighted, there are still some questions that remain about that travel piece that maybe will be addressed with future guidance.
So, generally with travel, I guess I read the announcement and the guidance to say that they have eliminated, what is what they think is an expanded definition of non-campus property. So the slide that I had that identified what is non-campus property, owned or controlled, there's no longer this pretty expansive definition of what owned or controlled means. That's been eliminated too. And so I think it's up to the institution to decide what they want to do with that. But most institutions that I've talked to so far about this are not going to, as they move forward, continue to get local law enforcement statistics for travel. If they have more than an overnight stay, they're not going to do that. So, and I think that's a very reasonable approach with what we've been given, that's what they're saying you have the ability to do. Now, if you still want to do that and you want to explain that, I think there's some safe harbors there as well, but it is a lot of work. And so I guess that's a fuller explanation of what what I think the options are and why I put the slides as decision points, because with the Title IX regs, they are telling you what you have to have in your new policy and telling you a date you have to do it. This, to me, is more you get to decide and document how you're going to approach this, and when in doubt, look to the plain meaning in the statute. And the plain meaning of non-campus property may be hard to include a 2-night conference trip that's being sponsored by the school to present at a conference. Now, we're not doing any of that right now anyway, but, or I guess we are still doing sports, and so that your sports team is traveling to another city and staying in the same hotel 2 nights. That would have been considered to have been non-campus property under the handbook. That's been eliminated, and you just go back to the regulatory definition.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot more questions here. The one that was interesting that I think people wanted to ask about Title IX as well. So again, when the Biden administration takes over January 20th, the Biden administration may rescind this guidance if they want to. They could put out a new handbook, and in fact, some are being told that there is a new handbook that's in the works. So who knows what will happen, but it's within their ability to rescind this guidance from the beginning of the Biden administration. It is different for Title IX, and I think I've had 3 different questions. Those are regulations, and once regulations have the force and effect of law, then the new administration must go through the notice and comment rulemaking process in order to change those regulations. And so it is not as easy as kind of waving the magic wand and this has been rescinded. No, they actually have to put forth or promulgate proposed changes to the regulations and then go through a notice and comment period. So that is the difference between what has happened within Clery and what has happened within Title IX. And I just want to be clear about that so that we don't conflate those two, or what I'm saying about the Biden administration. And clearly, at least from their website, and I pulled that the day before the election, I will tell you. So I don't know if there's more information now, but at least from their website the day before the election, that is what the Biden administration was saying about Title IX and Clery. All right. Well, it looks like we've got more questions, but we've run out of time. So I just want to really thank everyone for attending the webinar today. As we said earlier, you will get a copy of the presentation. You'll get a recording of the presentation. A copy of the materials are in the resource folder. One thing that we would like to just remind you of is that many of you work with Mary Jones and our Clery compliance tool set. If you're interested in a demo, the next demo is on December 2nd of the tool set, so you can sign up for that. It's free, of course. And I just really want to thank Ellen and Elizabeth. This is tough, tough to try to determine all of these changes and what